Welcome to the PerpCast. I'm your host, Ray, the social media and PR manager for Perp Games, and this is a VR-centered podcast that explores the wider games and virtual reality industry. Last week we spoke to Sarah B. Alfgrim and Olaf Redmalm at Zoink Games to ask all about Ghost Giant and what it was like to work in VR. It's a lovely conversation, so make sure you take the time to check that out. But this week we're going to be talking a little bit about another game that we're publishing. As we recently announced, we're honoured to be working with Mace Fury on their incredible adventure Doctor Who: The Edge of Time, based on the globally renowned franchise from BBC Studios. There's a PlayStation VR physical release arriving in EU territories on March the 13th. And so to talk to us a bit about the game, we're delighted to be joined by Marcus Moresby, creative director, and Joey To, lead game designer for Mace Fury. Thanks both for joining us so much. How are you doing today?
Very good. Yeah, just trying to get back up to speed with the project, really. But yeah, all good.
Yeah, I'm all good as well.
Excellent. Yeah, really good to chat to you. But thanks so much for taking the time. I know it's a busy time for you guys at the moment. But it's a real pleasure to have you on the show, and we're going to be talking all about Doctor Who, how The Edge of Time came about, and much, much more. I guess it makes sense to start from the beginning. Tell us a bit about yourselves, your career in the games industry, and how you got to Mace Fury and working on Doctor Who.
Okay, so I guess my route is a bit less traditional. I've not really worked in the games industry at all up until we started Mace Theory. Before that, I spent about 17 years working in animation and motion graphics. I used to run a studio called Found, and from there, we used to do all sorts of things like music videos, pop stars, TV commercials, things like that. So I guess my background getting into this project was through my BBC contacts back then. But I suppose in a way, games is something that I've always been interested in games since I was a kid. My brother works for Square, so it's kind of always been around. And VR is just such a perfect, new, exciting medium that I just got really excited by. And then we kind of started a new studio based off that passion, really.
Yeah, VR is a fascinating technology. What I found quite interesting about it is how a lot of people haven't necessarily come from a games background, but they've actually now found themselves getting involved with games because the technology is so different and interesting, because it does serve multiple purposes. I mean, it's not just for games. VR has obviously been used in things like doctor surgeries and for military training. So it's got such a wide spectrum, and it really suits a lot of different purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it came from a love of, weirdly, like immersive theatre. I went to a lot of things in London, a lot of shows, and I loved how that made me feel. Came around a time when VR was just in its early new days. And then, it actually, when I started playing with it, I realised it was something I really wanted to get into. And I had a set of skills from animation that I could translate into game engine, and then I took it from there, really. But then I suppose I'm quite different from Joey.
Yeah, so this is Joey. I guess my career in games started, I got quite lucky. I straight away got a chance to work at PlayStation as a game designer. So previously, before that, I was a web designer. So I had a lot of skills that I could take over in terms of like UX and UI. So that's how I got my luck, I guess, to work at PlayStation London Studios. And then gradually, through my career there, I was about 8 or 9 years there. I became a bit more confident, I guess, and I took up more skills, like became more technical, started to learn the tropes a bit more, doing a lot of training exercises there, and worked on like tons of titles while I was there. The last title I worked while I was at London Studios was VR Worlds, and that's how I got to work with Russell Harding, who is the exec producer, and he's actually at Mace Fury, and that's how we got our connections, and he brought me on board.
VR World is such a great introduction to so many people for VR, and obviously there was is a mix of games in there as well. Obviously, a lot of people forward that to the birth of Blood and Truth as well, which is one of the most successful PlayStation VR games ever. And it's such a great introduction to VR. I think that was my introduction and many others, like using I think my first feeling was in that Shark Tank, looking around, and it was just like, oh my gosh, what am I in? This is amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's incredible work that you did on that, and yeah.
It's weird because at the time I was working when PlayStation were branding it to PlayStation VR. I was brought in to discuss, some of the commercial side of it in terms of my old career. So I got to try it out when it was called Morpheus. I got to try some of the demos that Joey and Russell were working on behind closed doors. So in a funny kind of way, our paths were crossing then, and then it took a couple of years, and then here we are.
It always amazes me how small the industry is, how many people cross paths without knowing.
Definitely, yeah. It's very much a small world. I mean, I came from a games journalism background. I'd always bump into similar people, always been the same faces, and there's always that association. You may not necessarily know the person, but you've met them through social media and things like that. So it's incredible how your relationships form in this industry and how you can work together so closely with people.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to talk a bit about Mace Fury itself, because obviously now you both said you've both had very different routes getting to Mace Fury itself. So tell us a bit about Mace Fury and what kind of games do you like to work on? How big is the team? Where you're based? Things like that.
Okay, so I guess, Mace Theory came out of my old studio, Found. It's slightly more complicated because Found were owned by another studio called Studio Output. So the CEO of Mace Theory used to be my old boss. And I just got into, like I say, VR through immersive theatre, and it was something I invested in personally at home. I started off, bought an Oculus DK1 just after the Kickstarter, then got Unity, had to pay for Unity at home on my own because you had to use the Pro version back then, and that actually cost money to enthusiasts. So I personally invested in getting to understand the process and wanted to make stuff for it. Brought some work into Found back then for commercial clients. I worked on kind of live VR events for clients, it was mostly for drinks brands, which was interesting because an event with a drinks brand, you can imagine you don't really want people to be drinking beforehand before they're doing VR. But that was really great. It was actually quite a nice crossover of doing real set design mixed with VR. But naturally, the whole brand world moves on very quickly. It's very faddy. They moved quickly onto AR, and God knows what they're focusing on now. So we were talking about starting up a studio focusing on VR, maybe doing our own projects, but working in the sort of commercial world as well. But very quickly, someone recommended to us, just don't do that. Just find a different way of getting your projects off the ground and look for different opportunities in it. Just focus on one thing at a time at the beginning. So we did. We had a project that I made a demo for, which was at the time called The Vanishing Act. And that was something I went to Ian, the CEO, back then and said, look, I want to make a demo of something to show people what you could do with VR, because a lot of our clients back then were pretty clueless about what it was, and they thought it was 360 video, and that was it. So I wanted to do something room scale. I essentially made a demo which is a walking simulator in a way. You use the 3-meter room scale space, but you're constantly walking around corridors and through doors, and everything keeps changing behind you. So you go on a long journey for 20 minutes, but essentially you're walking around the room in circles. But that got us attention from a lot of people. This demo, we invited lots of people to come and see it. One of those sets were a load of old clients from the BBC. They were working with Doctor Who. It was also 2 weeks before the Doctor Who experience in Cardiff closed down.
Oh yes, I'm actually based in Cardiff, so yeah, it was sad times.
It was such, and for those that don't know, it was a semi-permanent installation experience for all things Doctor Who. Lots of costumes, props, pieces of set, and it had an immersive introduction where you actually ran through some of the sets with characters, which was pretty cool actually.
Yeah.
They wanted to document that somehow, like before it got taken down. So they just sent me down there, and I spent 2 days doing a photogrammetry session with it.
Right.
So created essentially point data 3D models from the whole set. And as much as I could sort of find, which I could access at the time, so Daleks and things like that. So we came back with hard drives full of this data, and it just sat there with nothing really going on with it for a while. And then one day Ian and I was talking, saying maybe we should just make something to kind of pique their interest. And one of the things that we did scan were the Weeping Angels. And so for fans, the Weeping Angels are such an iconic creature. We had to do something with it. We realised very quickly they work so well in VR. The whole concept of them is, if you look at them, they stay there. They're statues. If you turn away from them, they move towards you. Kind of like a playground game. Was it What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, or something like that? There's a few different variations on that. But for VR, that's perfect. Being able to turn your head and turn back and something's moved towards you is terrifying. So this is when Mace Theory were literally me and Ian, the CEO. And I'm not really a developer, but I can 3D model and use Unity and do very basic prototypes that people like Joey pick apart because they're made really badly. So I made this Weeping Angels demo in 3 weeks. We went in to see the BBC. They got quite excited, and then a couple of months later, we signed the license for it to develop a full VR title.
Incredible turnaround, and obviously, as you say, there's so much resources to draw from on Doctor Who, and I imagine that it really, like as you say, you had this gold mine essentially, or it sat on your hard drive. Think what can't we do with this? It's incredible history for the franchise as well. And I suppose it's quite an interesting point because you've mentioned there you worked on a game called The Vanishing Act as well, which was kind of your first project. So I mean, when you developed that, and how did that kind of help you prepare to make games in VR and figure out the kind of possibilities of what you could do with something like a Doctor Who?
I guess I came at the Doctor Who side from not so much a game's perspective, but more from an experience. Going to the Doctor Who experience was really valuable because it just taught me about some of the pacing of the story, how that gets delivered to you, how they, in that they work around the fact that the Doctor is obviously not there with you in person. They couldn't dress someone up as the Doctor, that wouldn't work. So it kind of helps inform some of those decisions about who you might be, what your role might be. The perfect thing with Doctor Who is you have the companions always, or temporary companions for episodes, or and you kind of play. It came apparent that you would become one of those characters. But yeah, I suppose I came at it from a inspiration of immersive theatre. What might happen if it was taken on in that world? And then it became very apparent that we needed to bring in people such as Joey to actually help us look into the gameplay side. Whilst I played games my whole life, I haven't had an established career making games. So it was important to build up a team around us so that we could do that properly. There were lots of things when we I showed Joey some of the Weeping Angel stuff at the beginning. We had quite a long conversation about just how that could work properly, how you develop that out.
Yeah, so I remember when Russ contacted me asking if I'd be interested in working like a Doctor Who IP, like a VR experience. Straight away I was instantly intrigued. I wasn't really doing too much at the time. I was like freelancing and working on my own project, but then I thought, I'll just come in and see what the guys have to say and show. And as Marcus mentioned, he did show me the Doctor Who prototype as well as Vanishing Act, and I was instantly sold, especially with some of the games that I like working on, like horror. The Weeping Angels, the core mechanic of that instantly was interesting for me. So straight away I said there's so many things that we can do with this area, and I was like, you know what, get me on board. I'll be happily working on this Doctor Who game.
It's just one of those franchises where I imagine everyone has an idea of what an episode of the show looks like, and you've got such a host of iconic villains, a host of iconic actors have been involved and subcast. It's incredible, and it's a great point you made there about the experience, because I've actually done it when there was Matt Smith was part of it, and I also did it when David Tennant was part of it, so I saw both sides of it. And as you say, I completely see the comparison now to the game compared to that, because you are essentially feeling like a companion walking around, but obviously the VR experience is much more interactive than that, because you've got there are puzzles to solve and there's a world to explore. But I can see how the core sort of principles of that would have been adapted into VR, and how there's that crossover. So definitely makes a lot more sense now. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's one of those franchises where people pitch lots of ideas for the games over the years. But I guess it's interesting because Doctor Who is one of those sort of franchises where people have been calling for games games of all different types, from adventure games to puzzle games to action adventures. So VR, what made it feel like that was the next logical step for this franchise to really get a game of its own?
I guess it's probably the first chance you could have to step into an episode, if that makes sense. I feel a lot of the Doctor Who games, especially the very early ones, were based around using the franchise but applying it to an existing type of game, be it a platformer or a puzzle, which there's various degrees of success with those. It would be diplomatic to say, but yeah, it just felt like, well, how can we take someone, focus on the story, how can we get someone along the journey of being in an episode? And I suppose as well, it was like, well, a normal episode would follow usually one set of environments. How could we make this feel like a bit more than that? Maybe like a sort of triple episode, or just expand on it a bit. So it's kind of like not a mini series, but it's an elongated couple of episodes that combine together in this. But very quickly, I just wanted to get the gist of the difference in the sort of environments with the storylines as well. So straight away, well, basically when I knew we were working on the job, I spent 2 weeks at home just binging my way through as many episodes as possible. In the summer when it was blisteringly hot, just sat in the dark watching as much as I could, and then I just bought as many books as I could, read up on things. But when I'd be watching episodes, I was looking for things that would be interesting potentially in VR. And then I guess I noticed that a quite frequent story aspect to Doctor Who is they take the normal and then make it unusual. So it sort of, for me, I wanted an environment to start the game in which was quite everyday. Hence it starts in a laundrette, and then the storyline comes to you. And takes you on this journey. So yeah, the game's got variety in styles of environment. So obviously we wanted something sci-fi, something historical, something otherworldly, rather than just focusing on one of those. And then we had to get the TARDIS in, obviously. That's core to the whole thing. But yeah, so that sort of gave us a bit of a structure. Then we looked at various monsters we wanted to work with. I suppose one of the main things that came out of this was we were coming into this project at a time when the BBC were in between Doctors, so there was only so much information we had access to, and when we did learn of things, it was very top secret at the time, making sure things didn't leak. So we didn't even see the interior of the new TARDIS until it came on TV.
Wow.
Apart from there were a few leaked photos. So I remember being on WhatsApp with people when it was on air, just freaking out at the complexity of it, thinking, oh my God, we've got to build this now in 3D. Same for the title sequence. Oh my God, they're doing fluid dynamics. Why? So that informed a lot of our decisions. We had to work around that. Some things we couldn't compromise on. The TARDIS interior has to be the same. There's just, all sorts of things to consider along the way.
I was going to also mention that I think VR as a medium for the next logical step for Doctor Who, I think where VR works best is when the player is immersed in the environment that they're in. And this goes back to the original question of that we play a companion rather than a Doctor, because you want to playing as yourself, and that's more powerful. And you're not necessarily playing the current season Doctor. As well as that, there's certain things like the TARDIS, the whole portal effects of inside out and everything, like everything's larger in the inside. That as an effect in VR is powerful, and that was always going to work really great once we got it done.
Yeah, quite a challenge. There's a lot of geometry going on at once.
Thinking back to playing the game myself now, when you first walk into the TARDIS from that initial sequence, it's kind of like there's that dazzling moment where you enter it for the first time and you see the interior, and like I guess it's an effect that only really works when you, as you say, you're an individual. You're not necessarily playing the Doctor. Like, the Doctor would walk in there many times and be like, yeah, I've seen this before, I'm walking in. Whereas if you, as a person who's never seen it before, or I guess from the aspect of story who's never seen it before, it has that much greater impact and effect.
I guess it's something that you could only really do in VR as well. You couldn't get that inside outside thing in real life. It's a TV trick, so this is the first time as a person you can actually experience it, and that was quite an exciting challenge for us, just to make sure we get that
Definitely.
right.
Well, as you say, that's I'll talk a bit more about how you worked on the interior of the TARDIS in a little bit, because I mean that must have been, it sounds like it was a hell of a challenge, so I'm really interested to see how that came about. Talking a bit about the greater picture of Doctor Who as well, I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges you think you faced while you were working on a massive property like Doctor Who and crafting a story in that universe? Like, how difficult was it to kind of find the right story and pick the right villains and the right locations?
So I guess with something like Doctor Who, it feels like anything is possible in terms of storyline. There's a reality that comes with that in terms of the show has been going for a long time. There's been a lot of writers on the show and people who've written characters. So as a result, there's a lot of complications to do with licenses which relate to individual types of character, like the Daleks or the Cybermen or Weeping Angels. They all tie into their respective writers. So from a perspective, just a boring perspective of licensing, you know that all has to be checked and passed by the people that originally wrote them, or the estate that owns them. There was also the challenge that this being a new series with a new Doctor and a fresh direction, they, for example, the Daleks, that was a secret for quite a long time that they were going to come back at the end of Jodie's first series. I wanted to use the Daleks, obviously. They're just iconic. There were a lot of sort of long-winded conversations where people couldn't really say things, so we kind of steered around that and got to the point where I think they were nicknamed Derek to me, or something like that. Something like, oh no, I think it was Colin. So yeah, we talk about those things in that way. It felt like with our release, we would launch in between that series and the series that's just finished, so actually it would come after that Dalek episode, so that's okay. But with that come, you know, challenges of which Dalek should be used. Thankfully the storyline on TV worked in that it didn't really matter. Weeping Angels, I definitely wanted to get in. There was no way I was working on a VR game for Doctor Who without them, so that took a bit of arm twisting. There were some other characters, I suppose, just were a bit more complicated. Your favourite, Joey, being?
Oh, okay, so...
We would have loved to, but...
Yeah, so when we go through the prototype phases, we did like lots of prototypes with the Daleks, Weeping Angels, making sure they're working. And then, of course, while I had my like free time on the side, I thought, let's prototype some like Cybermen. That went through a couple of like tests, but unfortunately that didn't make the cut.
Oh, I mean, we weren't to know that they were coming back in the current series. So, and with that quite often come refreshed designs and so on. So we had to work around it a little bit. But, you know, in fairness, it gave us room to create some of our own. And I was very lucky to work with a great writer, Gavin Collinson, who'd worked with the show for years, through some of the sort of golden era of the sort of David Tennant phase. So he came on board. He's also written for other Doctor Who games. So he helped us create new creatures. And also he's perfect because he understands the universe so well. I would have ideas and we would work together on how to sort of write that in. But obviously that would all have to be passed by the current showrunners. So the guys in Cardiff would receive our sort of scripts and concepts, and we would have to make tweaks and changes, bearing in mind some of the things we weren't to know, but obviously know a bit more now.
Yeah, I guess it's quite tricky from your perspective. I mean, obviously you would have had access to information that most people wouldn't, but then at the same time you still didn't have all the information you needed to create, you know, everything that you wanted to create. But it's also fascinating as well how you've talked a bit there about how, you know, you had your own concepts, the creatures you really wanted to get in, couldn't quite make it in and things like that. But I mean, I'm quite interested to find out as well, like, because obviously this is a lot of the things in the game are actually created by yourselves. And so I guess when you've worked with the writer and you've worked with the team, is there kind of like, is there a position in the timeline where you feel like Edge of Time sits? would you say it ties into any previous episodes, or did you always envisage it as its self-contained title, its own entity?
I'd say it's self-contained, but if it were to fit, it would be between series. There are some script-related things that do refer to the current companions, so it definitely fits in there, and obviously because it's Jodie. There were early conversations, like my first concept, before we knew much about the new series, I almost created a spectrum of new Who being Jodie, classic Who being the ability to go back and use previous Doctors. And what I think we've kind of got to is somewhere in the middle, in that we're using the Time War Daleks, for example. I imagine there'll be a new design for those coming up. But it was a balance in between. I think I listen to what fans say, and there's always this dream of the Doctor Who game where it's everything. It has every Doctor, every TARDIS, every Sonic, every monster, the ability to go through time, the universe, open world. It's just, everyone would love that. I can't imagine what that would cost and how long that would take to develop, and would hope that the fans would spend vast amounts of money to pay for what that development cost would be. But yeah, I mean, ultimately you kind of want to think of it as its own mini-series or episode, and then hopefully with the potential to keep going. If it sells well, if it works, if the BBC want to keep going with it, then yeah, by all means we'd happily keep going with the storyline or create new ones.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you've got you've built a foundation. You've probably got some concept work, but it sounds like you've got concept work there that didn't make it into the final cut. So there's obviously there's room there to potentially grow for the future if you wanted to do that, and the opportunity arose. So it sounds really, really exciting. And I guess because one of the main cores of this story is the fact that there is a new villain affecting the entire universe and threatens to disrupt the universe as we know it. And so when you were sort of creating a new villain for the game, what kind of research did you have to do to make it feel appropriate in the Doctor Who universe? And like, how did those conversations come about when you were crafting that to make it feel like it fit in this universe?
I guess that's where Gavin came in so importantly. I suppose I developed an early structure for how I wanted the game to be laid out, with various monsters in certain environments. Then we spent a while swapping those around. Like originally things like the Angels would have been on the Starship, but it felt like actually what we did with that was tie that back into something more in line with London, or something that might tie back to other previous episodes. But in terms of the main enemy, yeah, that was something we came up with this early idea of this reality virus, and I guess that's something Gavin came up with, but he made it feel like this all-powerful creature that's always existed. But at the same time, we had this idea of this time loop and how she's kind of, this is always going on, and your task is, your role is that you're always there to, I don't know, stop it or prevent it, but you in yourself naturally are stuck in this same time loop. So it's something that the Doctor has faced as a foe, but that people might not know this has ever gone on in a weird kind of way. But yeah, definitely it was something Gavin, he knows the lore, he knows everything about the show, so he definitely led a lot of that direction. And
I suppose when you're kind of like conceiving and creating these characters as well from a development point of view, I mean, like how when you're sort of comparing them to the props you had access to and the creatures already existed in the game, and you're creating those assets and you're building them side by side, how did that sort of come about? I mean, what were the difficulties in trying to create, as you say, from an aesthetic point of view, then something that really looks and feels like it fits within the universe?
Well, various things. There's the Hydrox in the laundrette, which tied in quite nicely into the new series. There's supposed to be these creatures that are used by other monsters in the show, and as a result that gives you things, areas to look at in terms of the aesthetics. They also lean a lot on, say, the organic matter, but there's a lot of that we can lean on as well. The actual creature, the enemy of the first, that kind of gives you a bit of a clean slate, because she's supposed to be this almost godly creature, so we can actually use that as a chance to do something that might be particularly difficult in the show from a sort of scale perspective. So I wanted to use that as an opportunity to do something different. But then, there's so much material. The amount of books I've got which refer to every single character, all the sort of concept designs. We had some access to some of that stuff as well from the BBC. So there's a wealth of resource material that we can use to inspire those creatures, for sure.
You're talking about how you've based that on levels and you've based it on the environments around as well and existing things within the franchise. When you were creating the levels and designing from the top down, how did you decide what you wanted to create as an environment and how those levels would kind of be structured with like the pacing of the puzzles, the pacing of like where you move between areas and the things you would see?
I guess it's quite a collaborative process. Like I would have a rough theme potentially, and we could be working on the aesthetical design of that. But then working with Joey in terms of what sort of puzzles, what kind of layouts, we very much teamed up on that kind of thing.
And then in terms of like the whole level design or level structure, some of the levels, not all, were created with something called kit parts, which is like jigsaw pieces. So we had all the main parts created, and then as a player, I would like basically plot a path for what we find that would be the most interesting for the player without getting too long or too boring, as well as leaving openings for like areas to reveal new puzzles and exits.
Yeah, it's very much a collaborative process between the team, it opens up all kinds of possibilities for what you can do with sound design, where you could, I mean, it's not like it's a horror game, but where we could put tension. It's a really fun part of the process, I would say, just that early grey boxing and laying out of items. And then so from design, it's referencing once again from the show. You find certain themes when it comes to, say, sci-fi starships that you can take early reference from. Followed one of the main designers on Twitter who was working on the current show, so that was quite handy at the time. But yeah, it was just quite a fun process. There's so much to work with. And
it's interesting as well because obviously you use things like the sonic screwdriver to help you with some puzzles. So you're using iconic equipment from the show to help. So that must have been quite an interesting challenge as well, figuring out how you could use these kind of resources the Doctor has access to throughout the show for the player to then use them to solve puzzles within the game as well.
Yeah, definitely. Talk about the sonic screwdriver. It's like when we was like researching what the sonic screwdriver has done in the whole TV show, basically it's done a whole wide range of stuff. For obvious reasons, we couldn't cater for every single option, so we had to like pick and choose what would be the most interesting, what could we like repeat in the game, and what is the most intuitive for the player.
There were rules with it, like it doesn't work with wood, which are quite interesting from a sort of gameplay perspective. So it might be that some levels you get to use it much more, and then in others you're limited because you can't use it, so you have to use different skills in that scenario.
So yeah, as we know, Edge of Time includes full voice acting and voiceover from Jodie Whittaker as well, who's the 15th Doctor. I just wonder how you got to work with Jodie.
Well, yeah, we definitely worked with Jodie. It was a little bit tricky because I think it's quite hard when you sign up to be the Doctor. That is what you do all year round. So the timings lined up in some ways to be helpful, because she would be filming certain scenes, say to do with the TARDIS in Cardiff. So we got access at those points, but there was a lot of filming in other countries, so she was away for long periods of time. But when I did work with her, it was such a joy. Actually, she's great fun, and because she's new to being the Doctor, there's lots of moments in there when we would mention something from maybe what a previous Doctor had said, or reference something from an earlier episode before her time, which maybe for her, she'd never pronounced these things before. So we would sit there and quickly check things on YouTube, because everything is on YouTube to do with Doctor Who, and would very easily be able to sort of find, oh right, that's how David Tennant said it, right, go, let's do that again. So yeah, she was so good that you didn't actually need that much time in a funny kind of way. She just would nail it, and the pace she has with the Doctor is quite quick and it's kind of a bit offbeat, erratic, which works in our favour. But then I was also keen to work with other people that had been in the show. For example, the enemy in Edge of Time is actually voiced by Martha Jones's mum, the actor that played her. So yeah, we got to sort of squeeze some of these other bits of Doctor Who into there wherever we could.
I imagine she probably did was able to suggest some things that would tie into the role that she was playing on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we quite often rewrote things on the spot, just the way she would pronounce things, because it does kind of lean a bit on that Yorkshire dialect. So yeah, there'd be ways she would say things that we would not really think of. But yeah, definitely.
Sounds really fun. And I guess that's the exciting part of developing these things, is that you get these incredible collaborative experiences that perhaps you would never have anticipated to have. And, you know, the memorable experiences that have gone into the making of the game. So when you see a particular scene, it's going to mean so much more to you as well when you win. And obviously the game gives you exciting opportunities to pilot the TARDIS, use the sonic screwdrivers we talked about. And we've mentioned obviously about how you learned about the TARDIS pretty much as it was airing on television. So, I mean, when it came to actually designing that interior, that iconic interior, I mean, how did you even begin to do something like that?
Well, I was very lucky to be invited down to the set numerous times, so that was quite fun. I physically got to play with the TARDIS myself on my own, but then to get that accurate was so important to us. We had access to photogrammetry data, LiDAR scans, which gave us scene scale, but then everything was modelled by hand. It's not like we took the photogrammetry data and used those meshes. We had to basically make everything work. It's such a detailed space that, you know, you're looking at some of the early poly counts were disgusting. Yeah, that was quite hard to get that in, but what can you do? You can't redesign it. You've got to make it work. But yeah, it's great. It's such a great design. I actually got to see the updated design as well, which aired in the latest series. So I've got to go up the stairs and peer behind some of the areas you may not have seen yet. But so that's quite cool in itself.
Yeah, even though there are areas that people haven't seen yet, I guess it gives you a kind of a context to emphasize on things that people do know about, to kind of like really make those seem as perhaps more important than perhaps people realize, and perhaps to kind of like, you know, really show a new approach then to familiar themes that people are seeing in the show, perhaps to give them a new unique insight by playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just such a great place to be, actually, inside the TARDIS, that, yeah, just being there informs so many of these little decisions. We even, my sound designer, well, the musician actually, Richard Wilkinson, who is amazing. He knew I was going on set one day and asked me just to record the sounds of some of the items. So, you know, turning switches, flicking dials, so on. So he could include some of that sound design into his music for TARDIS moments and so on. Yeah, it's all really important to give that, to add to that feel of being there.
Definitely, that immersive feeling. That's what VR is all about. And I suppose with VR still in its infancy, I mean, how crucial do you think having iconic properties like Doctor Who are going to help that medium grow in the coming years?
I think it really helps bridge the gap between games and experiences. I think at the moment, naturally, VR exists because of games, and gamers have supported it, invested in it. So a lot of the titles out there are game focused, but something like Doctor Who potentially brings in people who might not have played games before. We're definitely finding as it expands, things like, say, the Oculus Quest are selling really well, and the audience for that is not just the games industry. It is pretty broad, actually. It surprises me when I look on some of the forums just for Quest. So the audience is growing, it's getting wider. So I think things like this, like Vader Immortal, they're all really important to get people interested in it.
And I also think it makes some decisions for us, or what type of experiences or games that we create on VR. It's like you do get the hardcore games created for like the high energy or high action type of gamers. But if you want to do something like narrative based, you're also free to do that.
Absolutely. When you've got recognizable property as well, people will immediately connect with that. And obviously, Doctor Who is a massive part of that. Vader Immortals is a massive part of that. And they're the things that make people want to buy VR and get involved in VR and try it for themselves. I think a big part of me wanted to try a quest out was Vader Immortal, because I purely just wanted to feel like, I'm a huge Star Wars nut, and I just wanted to feel what it was like to be in that space and just, see that how that world comes together. So it's so crucial. I think it's so important to the medium to have that,
and it gives people a taste for it. When you've held that lightsaber for the first time, your mind's racing as to, well, what other films or TV shows would I love to actually be in? Quite often it's about, and more so, it's more about world building, universe building with these things. So it makes it easier in a way to create experiences that fit into these worlds and universes. And
also, it's so hard to appreciate or understand how magical VR can feel until you've tried it. And it's only until, it started with the PSVR, but it's only really until like the Quest where you can just take it down to your relative's place, because it's mobile, get them to try it, and they're instantly sold. It's like you win them over straight away.
Absolutely right. And people are actually out in public spaces. We've seen the age-old joke of people being sat in traffic jams and being stood outside with a VR headset on, just in the middle of a traffic jam. It's just these are the crazy times that we live in, and it's incredible how VR is now portable and accessible to everyone wherever you are. It's amazing. Well, last two sort of questions. Going back to Doctor Who. Obviously, with this new physical release, you're adding some mini games as well on top of the base game. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they work and why they were added?
So when we finished the game, there were like key areas that we decided, or which players would like to repeat or go to straight away without necessarily playing the full game. So we wanted to cater for those kind of players. So we decided on like a quick play option, which let you quickly see the title sequence, because everyone wants to see the amazing title sequence in VR. Everyone wants to see the Daleks, for example, or just like YouTube streamers, they like to have like a horror section, so we can instantly teleport them to like the Weeping Angels gameplay area. Yeah,
it's kind of catering for. It's like we were just saying earlier, like there are people who own VR, but then they want to be able to show it to friends and family. So it's allowing people to step into those things quickly without having to understand the entire journey that it may have taken to get to those points.
Yeah, because the whole experience is actually fairly like movie length. It's like sometimes not everyone has that time, or it's like they want to quickly have a quick go at something that's like fun for, let's say, 10 minutes and then go back to it later at another time. So that's why we decided to add that option.
Perfect reason to do it as well. As you say, you have to reach certain points in the story to access those things, whereas you say people may not have the time, or people may get stuck and they may get a bit frustrated, or they may not be used to it before, so they want to just kind of feel that experience, and that might be the thing they need to actually ease them into playing the full game, or to play other games down the line, or even do whatever they want in VR. So that's a great reason to include them, definitely.
That's right. And it's like when we go back to, let's say, when relatives come round on a holiday, it's like you want to straight away let them see the Weeping Angel section and see how, let's say, your aunt plays it, and you get to film it and you upload the reactions online.
That helps out. So, yeah.
And she'll never forgive you.
Yeah, exactly. She's not coming around again.
Yeah. So I just want to both say thank you very much for being a part of this. I've just got one final question for you both. This might be the hardest one of the lot. Who is your favourite Doctor, and what is your favourite villain? I think I know one of your favourite villains already, but who are they and why?
I grew up with sort of Sylvester McCoy days, which are quite twee. But of the recent reboot series, I'd say I'm quite drawn to Matt Smith, actually. I know David Tennant's the easy fan favourite, but I love a bit of Matt Smith.
For me, I grew up with Tom Baker, so that I have to go to him straight away. In terms of like my favourite villain, I have a soft spot for Weeping Angels for obvious reasons, because I love horror. But I think the Cybermen has also something interesting with that, especially with the new series. There's like so much potential with them, like how they opened up that story.
Yeah, for sure.
I think for me, I'm probably going to go the David Tennant option. I love the David Tennant, but yeah, the Weeping Angels and the Cybermen and the Daleks are easily up there, and it's the creative process behind all of these. The entire show is incredible, and what you've brought to it is really exciting as well. So thank you very much for joining in on that. Feel free to let everyone know where they can find you, and anything else you may want to share with your respective audiences before we close up.
I guess to see what we're up to anytime, naturally, our Twitter account's probably the most up to date. So that's Maze_theory. And yeah, just obviously there's stuff on our website, but we as we announce more stuff, we will be quite vocal. There's a few interesting things ticking away in the studio, which I'm quite excited to announce, but it's a little bit early just yet.
And also, I mean, have to appreciate all of the fans and everyone who's supported us since the beginning. Keep it up, and then we look forward to like communicating with them in the future.
Yeah, it's always good to get feedback from people and see, both positive and negative. It always helps because VR is a growing medium, and there is no right or wrong way of doing stuff. So it's just, I'm always fascinated to see how different people play things in different ways.
Definitely. Well, thank you both so much. It's been really interesting chatting to you. And as you say, there's lots of exciting things to come from Mace Fury, so stay tuned for that. If you want your questions answered in a future show, reply in the comment section below or send us a message on your preferred social platform and we'll do our best to answer them. What would you like to see in future PerpCasts? Sound up below in the comment section as we're looking to make this a show that's informative and interesting to you as possible. You can find Perp Games on Facebook, tweet us at Perp Games, subscribe on YouTube using the link in the description below. You can also find us on Discord, Instagram, LinkedIn, and get all the latest news on our products on perpgames.com. Thanks very much for listening. See you next time.